sealed glass ampule is lifted above a crowd inside a cathedral in Naples. Inside it, a dark, congealed substance, traditionally believed to be the blood of a man executed roughly 17 centuries ago. The priest turns the reliquary, tilts it, and the substance that looked completely solid a moment earlier begins to move. People have been standing in that same cathedral, watching some version of this exact moment for roughly 600 years. What's actually inside that glass? Why does it appear to change from solid to liquid at all? Has anyone ever been allowed to test it directly? And does the Catholic Church itself even call this a miracle? The saint at the center of all this was Januarius, known in Italian as San Gennaro, traditionally remembered as a bishop martyred during the persecution of Christians under the Roman Emperor Diocletian, sometime around the year 305. Much of what's commonly repeated about his life and death comes down through later tradition rather than solid contemporary documentation, including the popular story that a woman named Eusebia collected some of his blood into small glass ampoules immediately after his execution. That's the legend. Here's where the historical trail actually becomes traceable. The relics themselves are traditionally said to have been interred in the 9th century and brought to Naples sometime in the 13th. But the very first secure documented account of the blood liquefying doesn't appear until 1389, recorded in a chronicle describing a procession held that August during a period of serious famine in the city. Before that date, we're relying entirely on later tradition. After it, we're standing on actual historical record. That's an important distinction to hold on to because popular retellings often blur it. The relic's traditional origin, the age of the surviving ampoules, and the earliest documented liquefaction aren't the same fact, even though they frequently get flattened into one simple story. From 1389 onward, the pattern that continues today took shape. 3 times each year, the ampoules are brought out before crowds inside the Naples Cathedral on the Saturday before the first Sunday in May, marking the transfer of the relics. On September 19th, the saint's feast day and the traditional anniversary of his martyrdom. And on December 16th, commemorating the belief that his intercession spared the city from a catastrophic eruption of nearby Mount Vesuvius in 1631. During each ceremony, the substance inside the ampoules doesn't always behave identically. Sometimes it liquefies almost immediately. Sometimes it takes considerably longer, and sometimes, notably, it doesn't visibly liquefy at all. There's an odd historical footnote attached to the relics themselves worth knowing. Of the 2 surviving ampoules, one is only half full today because, according to tradition, an 18th century Spanish king, Charles III, removed part of its contents to take back with him to Spain. Even setting aside the liquefaction question entirely, the physical relic has its own documented history of being handled, moved and altered over the centuries, long before anyone thought to bring a spectroscope anywhere near it. That failure carries enormous weight in Naples. Tradition has long treated a failed or delayed liquefaction as an unsettling omen for the city. In December of 2016, for example, the substance reportedly did not liquefy during the scheduled ceremony, and the failure was widely reported in the press at the time, with plenty of speculation about what it might portend for the year ahead. It's worth being careful here. This is Neapolitan tradition and popular interpretation, not anything approaching demonstrated cause and effect. Lists connecting specific historical disasters to specific failed liquefactions tend to be selective, remembering the failures that preceded misfortune while quietly forgetting the many ordinary years when nothing unusual followed either a success or a failure. So has anyone actually gotten inside that glass to find out what's really there, not in the way you might expect? In 1902, a scientist named Professor Sperendeo was permitted to pass a beam of light through the upper portion of the sealed ampoule during a liquefaction and examine it spectroscopically. The resulting spectrum showed lines consistent with blood. But be precise about what that experiment could and couldn't actually establish. It suggested the presence of at least some blood-like material inside the sealed container. It didn't identify whose blood it might be when it originated, or rule out other substances potentially present alongside it. Nobody before or since has been permitted to open the ampules or extract a direct sample for full laboratory analysis. The relic itself remains sealed, and the custodians responsible for it, a historic lay confraternity tied to the cathedral's chapel rather than the Vatican directly, have not made it available for that kind of destructive testing. Which brings the story to the explanation you've probably already heard of, even if you didn't know the details behind it. In 1991, 3 Italian researchers, Luigi Garlascelli, Franco Ramaccini, and Sergio Della Sala, published a study in the journal Nature, proposing a natural explanation grounded in a property called thixotropy. Here's what that actually means. Without the jargon, some gels and suspensions behave like solids while sitting undisturbed, but turn fluid the moment they're shaken, stirred, or otherwise mechanically stressed, then thicken right back up once left alone again. Ketchup behaves this way. So does ordinary mayonnaise. Using only materials that would have been genuinely available in 14th century Naples, ferric chloride, calcium carbonate from something as simple as crushed eggshell, and ordinary salt, the researchers produced a reddish-brown colloidal mixture with strikingly similar thixotropic behavior to what observers describe seeing during the ceremony. Turning the reliquary over, precisely the gesture performed during the actual ritual, was enough to trigger their mixture's shift from apparently solid to visibly liquid. It's a genuinely compelling demonstration, but notice exactly what it demonstrates and what it doesn't. Garlascelli's team proved that a substance capable of mimicking this specific behavior could plausibly have been made using materials and techniques available centuries ago. They did not analyze the actual contents of the actual sealed relic in Naples because nobody has ever been allowed to. A working natural hypothesis and a confirmed explanation of one specific sealed object aren't the same thing, and the difference between them is exactly where this mystery has remained stuck for over 3 decades. So why not simply settle it? Why not open the vial? Beyond the obvious problem that doing so would risk damaging or destroying an object of immense religious and historical significance to an entire city, the ampoules remain under the care of that same historic confraternity, and no compelling evidence suggests they've refused access out of some deliberate effort to hide anything specific. What's actually happened is simpler and more mundane. Centuries of careful custodianship, layered onto a genuinely fragile, sealed, irreplaceable object, have consistently outweighed the scientific case for opening it. And here's a detail that might genuinely surprise you. The Catholic Church itself has never gone as far as popular retellings often suggest. The phenomenon is treated locally in Naples with the terminology of a prodigy, an extraordinary devotional sign tied closely to the city's own patron saint, rather than something formally proclaimed a miracle through the kind of rigorous universal church investigation reserved for other extraordinary claims. The Vatican itself has never issued a formal declaration authenticating the event in either direction. SacredHeart isn't going to claim more certainty here than the Church's own institutional caution actually supports. What isn't in question, regardless of where anyone lands on the scientific or theological debate, is what this moment means to the city itself. Generations of Neapolitans have packed into that cathedral 3 times a year, watching the Archbishop turn that same small reliquary in his hands. A group of women traditionally positioned near the altar, sometimes called the relatives of San Gennaro, are said to lead the crowd in fervent prayer and appeals directly to the saint as the wait for liquefaction stretches on. When the substance finally visibly moves, the crowd erupts. Church bells ring out across the surrounding streets, and white handkerchiefs wave through the cathedral, a wave of relief and celebration that has nothing to do with laboratory results, and everything to do with an unbroken relationship between a city and the saint it has trusted to protect it since the Middle Ages. Whatever is actually happening chemically inside that glass, the emotional and cultural reality surrounding it has remained remarkably constant for over 600 years. So return to that ampoule, held up once again above another crowd. History can tell us roughly when people first began documenting this event. 1389, during a city gripped by famine. Science can describe, with real experimental support, one plausible way a sealed substance might behave exactly like this without anything supernatural occurring at all. The Church can tell us what the relic means to the faithful who venerate it, while stopping notably short of formally declaring it a miracle in its own right. But unless someone is finally permitted to look directly inside that sealed glass, using tools far more precise than a beam of light from over a century ago, the actual specific answer to what's happening in that one small vial remains exactly where it has been for 600 years. Sealed behind the glass, waiting for the next person willing to turn it over and watch. Thank you for spending this time uncovering this story with me. There are so many strange, still unresolved mysteries sitting quietly at the edges of church history, still waiting to be found. If you'd like to keep discovering them, consider subscribing to Sacred Heart, because there are many more stories like this one still waiting to be told.